You just stopped breathing. Maybe it happened in your sleep. Maybe you choked. Maybe your body just decided, without warning, without explanation, to stop doing the one thing it has been doing every single second of your entire life. This is second zero. And what happens over the next 60 seconds is something most people will never know, because most people who experience it don't come back to describe it. But the ones who do say the same thing. It wasn't what they expected. Not even close. Let's start at the beginning. The very first thing that happens when you stop breathing is nothing you can feel. Your lungs, still full of whatever air was in them a moment ago, sit motionless. Your diaphragm, the large dome-shaped muscle beneath your ribcage that has been contracting and releasing approximately 20,000 times every day of your life, without you ever once having to think about it, has stopped. The carbon dioxide that your cells have been producing as a byproduct of metabolism is still building up in your bloodstream. Your heart is still beating. Your brain is still receiving oxygen from the blood that was already circulating. For the first few seconds, everything feels exactly the same as it did before. You don't know anything has changed. Around 10 seconds in, something shifts. The carbon dioxide concentration in your blood has risen enough that specialized receptors in your brainstem, called chemoreceptors, begin sending urgent signals. These receptors don't monitor oxygen directly. They monitor carbon dioxide, and rising carbon dioxide is the primary trigger for the breathing reflex. The signal they send is simple and overwhelming. Breathe. Now, if you are conscious, this is the moment you feel it. The sensation most people describe as air hunger. Not quite pain, not quite panic. Something more primitive than either. A compulsion so deep and so total that it bypasses rational thought entirely. Freedivers training for breath hold competitions spend years learning to suppress this signal. Most people cannot hold it for more than 30 to 45 seconds before the reflex takes over completely. But here's where it gets strange. Because the sensation of needing to breathe and the actual danger of not breathing are not the same thing, and they are not on the same timeline. The discomfort begins long before the damage does. Your blood, still carrying the oxygen loaded into it during your last breath, continues delivering that oxygen to your organs and your brain for several minutes after breathing stops. The urgency you feel at 10 seconds is not your body running out of oxygen. It is your body reacting to carbon dioxide it can no longer exhale. The two are easily confused. They are not the same thing. Around 30 seconds in, if you are conscious and resisting the urge to breathe, something remarkable happens in the brain. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Physiology monitoring the neural activity of trained breath hold divers found that at approximately 25 to 35 seconds of breath hold, a distinct shift occurs in brainwave patterns. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational decision-making and voluntary suppression of reflexes, shows elevated activity. The brain is not shutting down. It is working harder than usual, actively fighting against one of the most ancient and powerful automatic systems in the human body. Elite freedivers describe this moment not as suffering, but as a kind of negotiation. A conversation between the conscious mind and something older and deeper that simply wants to survive. At 60 seconds without breathing, if you are unconscious, the picture is different. Your blood oxygen saturation, which should sit between 95 and 100% in a healthy adult, has begun to fall. The brain, consuming 20% of your total oxygen supply, despite representing only 2% of your body weight, is the first organ to register the deficit. At oxygen saturation below 90%, cognitive function begins to degrade, reaction time slow, decision-making becomes impaired. Below 85%, confusion sets in. Below 70%, consciousness becomes unreliable. This is the physiological basis of hypoxia, and it is the reason that people who lose oxygen to the brain often don't realize anything is wrong until it is too late to do anything about it. The brain, as it loses the resources it needs to monitor itself, loses the ability to notice that it is losing those resources. But here is the part that no one talks about. At the moment of hypoxic loss of consciousness, researchers monitoring the brain activity of patients who lost consciousness due to oxygen deprivation have documented something that mirrors what Borjigan found in dying patients. Not a quiet fade, a surge, a brief, intense burst of organized neural activity concentrated in the same temporoparietal regions associated with self-awareness and sensory processing, occurring in the seconds immediately before consciousness disappears. People who have been resuscitated after hypoxic blackout, including near-drowning survivors and high-altitude climbers who lost consciousness, describe experiences that cluster around the same themes. A sudden and profound sense of calm replacing the earlier panic, a feeling of detachment from the physical body. In some cases, vivid visual experiences, despite the eyes being closed and the visual cortex receiving no new information from the outside world. Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist who spent decades studying near-death experiences in cardiac and respiratory arrest survivors, published data in The Lancet in 2001 showing that the content of these experiences, the calm, the light, the life review, was consistent across patients regardless of age, cultural background, religious belief, or the specific medical circumstances that caused the loss of consciousness. The experience did not correlate with how long the patient was unconscious. It did not correlate with the medications they had received. The most consistent predictor of the experience was simply that the brain had been deprived of oxygen to the point of unconsciousness. Something about that specific physiological state appears to reliably produce something that the people who go through it almost universally describe as meaningful. At 4 minutes without oxygen reaching the brain, permanent damage begins. Neurons, unlike most other cells in the body, cannot survive prolonged anaerobic conditions. They do not have the energy reserves or the metabolic flexibility of muscle cells or liver cells. At the 4-minute mark, the neurons most sensitive to oxygen deprivation begin to die. The hippocampus, critical for memory formation, is among the first regions affected. The cerebral cortex follows. If resuscitation does not begin within this window, the damage is not reversible. The person who is brought back will not be entirely the person who stopped breathing. But here is what the research on resuscitation consistently shows. 4 minutes is not a wall. It is a threshold. People have been successfully resuscitated with full neurological recovery after 5 minutes without oxygen, after 6. In cases involving cold water immersion, which dramatically slows the metabolic rate of brain cells and extends their tolerance for oxygen deprivation, full recovery has been documented after more than 40 minutes of submersion. The record for survival after cold water drowning with full neurological recovery belongs to a 2-year-old girl in Norway who was submerged for 66 minutes in near-freezing water and recovered without permanent brain damage. The cold had essentially paused her brain at a cellular level, buying time that no amount of medical intervention could have purchased in warmer conditions. Her body understood something that her doctors initially didn't. That dying slowly in the cold is not the same as dying. Every second you have is a second someone else already lost. The people who come back from the other side of a stopped breath don't come back wanting more. They come back wanting differently, more presence, more attention to the moments that don't seem to matter. Because it turns out the brain records all of them. The ordinary ones, the forgettable ones, the Tuesday afternoons you spent without thinking about your breathing, which is to say almost every afternoon of your life. Your lungs have been doing this since before you were born, since before you had a name for it. They will do it approximately 700 million times across the course of your life without asking for anything in return. The one thing they ask is that you notice them occasionally. Most of us don't, until the moment we have to.